Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News, and Happy New Year, everyone. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today, my guest is Miguel Mendonça. Before I bring him on, just a couple of announcements. You can always get new episodes free on Rokfin, Odysee, and all podcast platforms. Definitely check us out on Rokfin. Click that link in the description. That's where you get our premium content you can't find anywhere else. Our regular shows and all the content from every creator that is there on Rokfin. Check out all the podcasts that we feature on the Forbidden Knowledge Network. You get those on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. And follow us on Facebook. We got 2 Facebook pages. Those links are also in the description. Today I want to welcome Miguel Mendonça. He has a background in forestry and horticulture, journalism, geography and history, social science and environment. He worked internationally as a researcher, writer, and campaigner on renewable energy before becoming an independent researcher. He then published books on a range of themes, including ETs, hybrids, disclosure, the social history of the UFO topic, wisdom, and art and creativity. He now makes music full-time as Soka Miru and has just released his debut album titled On, Out, Into. Miguel, welcome. How you doing?
Good. Very good. Thank you. I just finished a festive curry. For some reason, I didn't feel like cooking over New Year's or any of that. So
I hear that.
Yeah, I went to the Indian. So
that sounds good, actually. Man.
Yeah, it's non-traditional, but well, unless you're in India, obviously. But
right.
Yeah, this place, they do this sweet and sour thing that I can't get enough of. And every time I get it, I have to ask them to put pineapple in it, because one time they put it in by mistake and it killed. It was incredible. And every time I call up, I say, can you put pineapple in there? And they have to ask me, are you absolutely certain? And I said, just trust me. And it's, yeah. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that does sound good. I might have to try that. Well, welcome to the show. This is going to be fun. Some of my favorite interviews are those that cover others' personal experiences, whether it's extraterrestrials, ghosts, angels, or any of this. I think that much of this, or maybe all of this phenomenon, is connected in very profound ways, and it's also extremely personal. The best way to put these incredible experiences together and understand them, I think, is to hear more personal accounts from people like yourself, just so we can put these pieces of our hidden reality together. So Miguel, this is your first time on. How did all this start for you? How did contact and an awareness, when did it all begin?
It was really early. When I was 3 years old, I mean, I've told the story on so many shows that I will just kind of whistle through this.
Sure.
But I had an encounter when I was 3 with an essentially invisible presence. And I knew it was there, and I knew that it knew that I knew it was there. And as soon as that thought hit me, that it knows I know, what happened was I suddenly understood from one moment to the next that reality is essentially kind of multidimensional. It's multi-layered. There are all these different elements and aspects of reality that are perceptible, but not necessarily via the physical senses, right? And those levels and layers of reality are essentially available to one another, and they can interact. But right, so that happened at 3, and then of course I go through life and I get to realize that people don't think that this is how it is, that growing up in a thoroughly materialistic society, particularly dominated by the scientific establishment, although, of course, you know, that's been thrown into absolute chaos, you know, for many years, particularly around climate change, which is something that I was very involved in as an environmentalist. And I got to see just how dumb people truly are and how desperate people are to believe the thing they want to believe, which is that everything's fine. I mean, I don't know if you've seen that movie, just came out this week. Don't Look Up.
Yes.
The Adam McKay movie. It's just a work of art. I mean, it's brilliant filmmaking. And if I feel like it's one of those movies that might get discovered way, way, way in the distant future. And people will show this and say, this is where people were at that time. I mean, we've known about the effects of man-made climate change since something like the 1870s. It was clear to a scientist then that adding more CO2 to the atmosphere would increase the natural greenhouse effect, trapping more heat, which has a cascading series of effects that are closely interrelated and essentially act to self-reinforce and accelerate. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, this year, the Amazon rainforest flipped to becoming, instead of a net carbon sink, a net carbon emitter. The Amazon now produces more CO2 than it absorbs. So that's game over. And I am one of those guys that is unafraid to bum people out. And I'm sorry about that. But I don't see any point in lying about it. I mean, I think that you can go one of two ways. You can either accept the science, which is pretty simple, or you don't, right? At that point, you either accept it or you don't. And either way, you've got to do something with that information. There's plenty of people that will do everything they possibly can and make decisions in their lives based on this information. And they will do things to try and make their own life more sustainable. And generally making it more sustainable tends to have a net result of making it cheaper, depending on what you're doing, particularly around insulation and things like that. Cooking from scratch more often. There's a heck of a lot that goes into those decisions, and they can be beneficial personally. But what it all adds up to ultimately, if at every climate change conference, the superpowers on the planet essentially decide we're going to do as little as humanly possible. So the thing I actually feel like I want to talk about today, which I have not done before in a particularly pointed way, it's sprinkled in there in some conversations, but I felt like the thing that I wanted to do today is it's not coming out because, like I said, I've talked about this before, but I feel like I want to talk about these things from the perspective which is kind of native to me. And that perspective is that of the visitor. From early childhood, I felt like I was not from here. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are deep into this in terms of, deciding or understanding, however they arrive at the sense that they are Arcturian or Pleiadian or whatever it might be. I'm not one of those guys. I don't have a t-shirt. I don't have a flag, nothing. All I have is the lifelong feeling that was really liberated when working on Meet the Hybrids with the people in that book. 8 people who were willing to come out globally through that book and say, this is me, I am part ET. And in that process, I started to remember a lot of things that otherwise, people might not pay a lot of attention to, but when you stick them all together, you arrive at a certain sense, and mine was that I think it is genuinely accurate that I am not from here as such. And there's lots of other things that happened along the road after that, which kind of reinforced this sense of being a visitor. And that's the way I've always felt. And so I suppose it should be no surprise that I ended up working as a social scientist in many ways and studying humanity. And that's been my focus more than anything else, is trying to understand this species as well as its place in the universe. And what a time to come. What a time to arrive on this planet, when we got hit in the face with, okay, if you continue down the kind of industrial path that you're on, it's game over. It's the end. And humans decided, well, we're just going to ignore that. And so if you're coming here from somewhere else, I mean, there may be people listening to this that know they're from elsewhere, that maybe share some of these perspectives, even if it's a shared felt sense, even if their politics are very different, even if their belief structure is different. It may be that there's people listening who go, yeah, that's kind of me, but maybe they're out. Maybe they're upfront with people. Maybe they can connect with the community about it, if not their parents and colleagues and so forth. But I'm at a point where I've got nothing to lose. I'm unaffected by what people think of me. There's no belief. There's nothing in our culture where I might get a phone call or a visit from the authorities who say, well, if you're not from here, then you shouldn't be, then you're not really a citizen, or you've got to renaturalize or something, right? So those systems don't exist here. But in general, my experience here has been pretty odd, in that, to me, I feel like wherever I was previously, whatever I'm most used to, whatever is most normal to me, is still very much with me, because no matter how much time I spend on planet Earth, and it's 48 years and counting, I still find humans the most weird ass species I can imagine.
Yeah.
It is far out. The choices, the decisions, even though I don't think a lot of it is choice, I think that a lot of us are kind of on rails, more or less. I think we get formed early on in a pretty deep way. And I think it's difficult for people to essentially separate themselves from their formative years, from the things that have been most influential, and kind of set in stone, more or less, their character, their personality, their goals, their values, their ambitions, their fears, all of these things. So I think that probably choice is maybe overestimated. I think humans generally, I think, are quite easily schooled and trained. I think it's quite easy to manipulate people. I mean, you could not have militaries if that were not the case.
Right.
It seems to me. Like, every time I look at anything done on the military level in this strange planet, I find that wacky. I mean, I was watching a documentary the other day about discoveries in the Mediterranean from this enormous sea battle that was written about in certain histories, but it was not, they'd never found evidence. So these guys took some sophisticated sonar equipment and basically started sweeping the area that they suspected was the site of the battle. And they found markers for it. And what it was these enormous bronze structures that is essentially like a wedge with 3 rows of fins. And these are essentially battering rams, enormous bronze battering rams that each ship will carry at its prow and just basically smash into the enemy, because there had no gunpowder at that point. That was naval warfare. It was just ramming with a big destructive wedge, essentially. And that was the height of military technology at the time. Just a piece of well-cast design metal. And you look at this and you think all of the work that it took, all of the human capital that it sucked down just to destroy other people. Right. And then you take that through line all the way through to something like the Manhattan Project and beyond it. And again, it seems absolutely bizarre to me. To most people, it's normal. It doesn't even scan, I think, as strange. But if it's not what you're used to, that you feel you're not used to, and you look at this phenomenon wherein a species will create planet-destroying weapons, nuclear weapons, and point them at themselves. I mean, I don't think there's any set of explanations will ever help me to truly get it from the inside.
No, you're absolutely right.
It's one thing to understand it, but getting it is something different.
Yes, I'm right there with you. Ever since a young age, I couldn't understand my peers, what was going on in school, what they were trying to teach me, some of the practices of our upper echelon, and just some of our belief systems and religions and things that they were just trying to force down your throat from an early age. I never fit in with it. I never understood it, always questioned it. So you're completely spot on about that feeling like, I'm not from here. I've always had that. Do you think that this is true for everyone, but most people are so indoctrinated into the system, they just have gotten comfortable with it? Or are some people just from this realm and they just belong in this materialistic existence? What do you think?
It's an interesting question. The reincarnation thing I find really, really interesting, because to me, it seems a sure thing that, so I had an experience when I was doing Meet the Hybrids. I did a regression with Barbara Lamb, and she's, a world-renowned regression therapist. She worked with God knows how many thousands upon thousands of people for decades. And so it was the first, I think she said it was the first remote session she'd ever done, because normally she likes to be very in the room with somebody so she can see their breathing, so she can get a precise read on where they're at in their consciousness, and so she knows when to go deeper, when to go further, and so on. But we set it up so that my laptop was close enough that she could see my chest rising and falling, and she got the information that she needed to be able to guide me. And we went back to some angelic encounters that I'd had. But after that, she was talking about, I think, something else. And I'm not sure what it was, but I suddenly found myself essentially out among the stars, communing. I became aware of this kind of, all these voices behind me. I couldn't see them. I wasn't facing them as such. I was kind of facing this way, and they're behind me. But it was like an enormous, ever-growing susurration of voices, just talking very quietly, so I couldn't quite hear what they were saying. But then, the more attention I paid to them, the more they paid to me, and it rapidly evolved into the most beautiful experience of my life. It was a feeling of total just joy and welcome and oneness and connection with all these voices. I mean, I don't know who they were or what this was. None of that. It was just a feeling of connection, communion, and overwhelming joy. And as I turned to look at my shoulder, there was like this row of dominoes, all these black shapes just disappearing off into the distance. And as I looked closely at them, I realized that they were all beings, but like 2D flat, like gingerbread men kind of thing. And I looked at two very clearly, and one, which was about 4 behind me, was just a field of energy. And the one behind that was, it took me weeks to kind of think about it in detail, but I realized, man, that's kind of a Sasquatch. And I happen to have a really pronounced fascination with Sasquatch. And I interviewed, one of the world's top researchers on this recently. So after that, I understood that these are other incarnations. And at the end of each incarnation, we essentially, I at least, kind of do a report that I have to go over what the experience was, what was done, what was left undone, what I might like to do next. And in the way that we, each morning, whenever we're going to leave the house, we dress appropriately for whatever we're going to do. In each incarnation, we will simply pick the form most appropriate to the experience we're looking for. So because that happens to me, and like afterwards, I started to hear similar ideas from other people. I don't know if I'd heard such things before. I don't remember anything clear that I'd heard that described what I'd experienced. But I heard people afterwards talking about the life review and things like that, or the interlife period and things like that. So for me, that was the experience, and it fits my general sense of what I am, which is a wanderer. And in fact, I had been talking to one of the hybrids one day, and I said, like, do you have any sense of what I was before this? Because something is coming up for me that it feels like it's time for me to ask these questions, to look into this, because of everything that had been opened up through working with those guys. And she said, well, number one, you already know that information's already inside you, and you don't need anybody else to tell you. There's something else she said. There was 3 things I remember, but as I think she said the third thing, suddenly it was like I was unplugged, and I kind of slumped sideways in my chair, and it was like my mouth was being used for a loudspeaker. And I said, I have the soul of a wanderer. And it came with this kind of booming in my solar plexus. And if that had not happened, I probably would have forgotten all about it. But that has only ever happened in my life when in the presence of a profound and important truth. And so I thought, well, I better find out what a wanderer is. And I found Carla Ruckert's book after some Googling, and had her and a bunch of other people describing essentially my life, my outlook, my sense of self in a way. I mean, not all absolutely carbon copies, but, similar enough that I thought, man, there must be something to this. For all these different people to self-identify as wanderers, and for that to have come unbidden, out of nowhere. I never heard that term before that I know of. So, and there's other things that happen. So, like I say, it sort of builds up in layers, and I think that happens for a lot of people. that there's all kinds of bits and pieces that they put together from their lives that start to develop into a clearer sense of self, identity, whatever that is for different people. And so for myself, that sense of being a wanderer is closely tied in with the sense that for my incarnations, I can choose. Like, I feel I have sovereignty, autonomy. I get to decide where I go and what I do, because ask anyone who ever employed me, I'm borderline unemployable, because I want to do what I want to do. I've got to do what I've got to do. And I think for a lot of people that find their way into this community, one way or another, I think that is a shared sense that generally we are people on a mission with a very strong sense of identity, of self, of purpose. I mean, I don't know a single person in this field that's lazy. Not one.
Yeah.
Nobody. It doesn't matter who they are. If I call them up, I am going to be blown away by, oh, now I'm into woodwork and I just built a 80 square foot garden shed with veranda. What are you talking about? And they'll, yeah, I just fancied it.
Oh yeah.
Right. I mean, this is the thing. And I think to answer the second part of the question, is everybody like this? Are people just indoctrinated? Are we different? I mean, I don't know enough about the cosmic order, the great cosmic order, to pin down some belief system and say, oh, I think it's all like this or it's all like that. I've heard so many. All I can go on is my thing tells me that I'm not like most people. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why they're different. So I basically lack the data to answer that question in any clear way, other than to, one could speculate that if we're all on a mission, some people may be here to simply live within the constraints of a kind of skeptical, cynical, fairly narrow materialist worldview where their central concerns are trying to pay the bills, trying to raise a family, to find some personal time. And I don't think a lot of people become, I don't think our culture encourages or particularly rewards individualism. It's easy to be shunned as we're a communal species. So people want to go along to get along. They want to fit in. For a lot of us, we can't. Some of us just are outsiders, and we find other outsiders, and that works great.
Yeah.
A lot of the time.
Your understanding of what the hybrids are. I know you wrote a book, Meet the Hybrids. Tell us about the hybrids and, your best understanding of who or what they are.
Ooh, I have nothing pithy. As you can tell, I'm not a soundbite kind of guy. I don't have simple, ready answers on a lot of things. I like to think through things. I like to join dots. I like to
that's great.
Kind of bring it all together and say, well, okay, there's this and this and this and this. So this bit seems simple. And if we had these 6 things, not so simple. And at a certain point, you run out of data, and so do they. So a lot of what we have on the hybrids comes from the horse's mouth. It comes from somebody saying, this is the way I self-identify. This is what I believe about myself, or what I know about myself. And then you've got the other section of this discussion, which is sort of the David Jacobs thing of it's all about evil ETs, or certainly ETs that are self-interested to the point of they don't give a damn about human beings, and they are here to essentially replace us, that they're creating these hybrids, as he calls them, and to him it's all fear, it's all dark. And certainly the last time I read anything of his or heard him speak, but that's a long time ago, that's 2015. And after actually meeting hybrids or these guys, I was done with the kind of fear side of it, because one of the first things to really understand, and I think the reason those books, Meet the Hybrids, has succeeded in the way it has, and it's reached I would think millions upon millions of people through interviews and documentaries and so on. And the book's done pretty well. I mean, it sells every day around the world. It's in, French and Japanese language editions also. And I think part of that is that it is a positive message, that it is, I think the key word for me through that whole process was love. These were people who were very loving, very spiritual, very service to others, fearless, inspiring, in other words, in many ways. And for them, they have different understandings of what they're here for. One of them said, well, I'm essentially here to record data for my people. That she said, I have, if I'm getting this correct, I haven't read the book in some time, I think she said, I have an implant or something somewhere in a system that is essentially her kind of transmitter, that whatever she experiences through the day is sort of uploaded to the home world at night. Let's say broadly, that was the impression. And then others like Robert Fullington was just so interesting, because he says, I don't know, but here are all the possibilities, and they're all pretty interesting. And yes, some of that is just to experience human form, to experience being a human at this time. And some of it was to try and stop this ship sinking, is to try and support people in their spiritual development. I mean, the word ascension is thrown around a lot. This idea that we're going to evolve beyond, the state of kind of raw 3D matter and evolve into a less dense state. The way I think about it after all of those interviews and knowing those guys personally for years is that the way I think about it is imagining Spain. That's the first place that comes to mind. And tourism in Spain. In Spanish tourism, you have certain classes of tourists, right? You have those who go for history, culture, religious purposes, artistic purposes. You have those who go there simply to get laid and fight in clubs, in nasty towns, and I guess the Balearic Islands and so forth. And all the rest of it. I mean, you have people who have family there. You have people who want a beach holiday that's cheap with the family. On and on it goes. You have people who maybe just love Spanish food, or they just love Spanish men and women. There's a lot to do in a country like Spain. And I think it's the same deal. That would be my sense of things, that everybody who is coming here in whatever form does so for their own reasons. So I don't think there's one type of hybrid one agenda. I think it's all happening. And why wouldn't it be? I mean, if you look at planet Earth, I mean, it's just insanely diverse. And sometimes it's very, very personal. It's not just, oh, this race does this. And that's where human beings screw up, to put it politely, relentlessly, endlessly. We still can't somehow get our minds around the fact that we come in different colors, in different sexes. It's apparently people are still unable to process this. So yeah, I feel like for myself, I've talked with, like I'm really close friends with Matt Thomas, who's in Meet the Hybrids. We talk most days about everything. And I said to him, as I've said to a couple of people, I hope after this, after the madness of planet Earth in the 20th/21st century, we get to hang out somewhere after all of this, in whatever form, whether we are just pure energy or in some degree of physicality, who knows? And we get the answers. We get to really understand humans in a way that we can't while we're here, because it's a bit bewildering and overwhelming. And maybe afterwards, it all falls into place a bit more, or the veil is drawn back and we realize, oh, we always knew what we were in for, but we decided to come anyway, because, I mean, frankly, I could write a book for any other species on humans and try and walk them through it and say, listen, I promise you, you will not believe me if I try and describe them. You couldn't make it up. You're just going to have to go. It's nuts, but it's fun. It's deep and it's wide. And you could be anyone, anywhere, and you're going to have a unique experience. I mean, I just personally struggle to imagine anywhere as crazy, as zany as planet Earth, as dark as planet Earth. You know, I mean, every time we make a movie about ETs, I would say more than 90% of the time they're evil. And all of it, I think, is projection. You know, even the way that the Abrahamic God is conceived. I remember being a kid and realizing it made sense to me that God did not make man in his image. Man made God in his image. God seems like a nutcase. God seems like that crappy boss that we've all had, or a problematic parent or partner, all the judgment, all the self-interest, married with this idea of, oh, it's for your own benefit. I love you really. You know, it just seems crazy to me. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I would love to get out of this planet after this is all done and meet whatever God does kind of run this joint and chew it over. You know, I'd love to know what the rules really are, because you imagine you are made God. Someone gives you the job and says, look, the old guy split. I mean, you've probably worked that out by now. You know, you guys have just run riot. It's all going wrong. So we nominate you and you've got to make the decisions. And then you look at human behavior. And at that point, you've got to know what the rule book is. Maybe there's like a kind of a freshers week for new gods, that they walk you through it and they say, all right, these are the rules. This is what this is about. This is what these guys are trying to achieve, or why they're here. And you've got to decide at what point you're going to intervene in this process. Because if these guys are here to do whatever, to learn whatever, in order that the great oneness absorbs all of that information, then your job is to do nothing, surely. You've got to let them get on with it. You've got to let them screw up, because it's their path. It's what it's for. In which case, is there any need for a deity at all? I mean, all these things, I would love to have explained to me when I'm on the other side. And I live in hope.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Now, these hybrids or any of these entities that you're encountering or we encounter through any variety of contact experiences, do you think much of them exist at all times right here, right now, but just beyond the spectrum of our vision to where we can't perceive them?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, thinking about my own experience of that visit, I realized only in like 2016 or 17, when I was still working on the books, I think when I was doing Being with the Beings, the final one, which is about contact, and there's some weird, funky things that happened to me in that time, odd things that are pretty tough to explain. I mean, it's just some strange things around contact, and we can get into that, but I had this sudden realization that I don't think that presence ever left. If I really pay attention to it, I really feel it here. And it's nameless and faceless. It doesn't seem to help or hinder. I don't know what it does, if anything. And I've talked with many people about this, and there's a lot that laugh in the most excruciatingly, absurdly condescending manner and tell me that it is, oh, haven't you worked it out yet? It's your higher self. Anyway, like they know, right? I mean, I don't think anybody really knows what it is. Mm-hmm. I don't. Is it me? Is like, if you consider the all is one concept, then sure, of course, on that level, it's part of me. But if you don't, then I don't know. I don't know if that's me or it isn't.
Would you say, on a whole, if you've noticed throughout not only your experiences but others, that people that have these profound contact experiences with something they believe is something outside of themselves, not just their higher self, that ultimately it makes them a better person. It makes them seek better things in their lives. It makes them want to make their own lives better. I know for myself this was true, and for probably 90% of the contactees I've spoken with. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've yet to meet somebody who told me, well, I actually became a bit of a dick afterwards. It's not to say that, I mean, we're all humans, right? So we're all a bit of a dick at some point. That's how it is. And I think we kind of forgive each other that, if you really stand back and look at the human experience in any kind of fair play sense, I think that we can be fairly allowing, up to a certain point. And that's why we have laws, because there's certain things we don't allow. But in general, yeah. Completely wandered off the point.
No, it's okay. I was asking if you think that, contact in general makes people seek better for their own lives.
Well, I think that one of the things that it does is it can be, not in all cases, but it can be good for the ego, in terms of if you have a genuine encounter. This is how I think you can tell the real from the fake. I think genuine experiences, I think it just breeds humility.
Yes.
Because life can never be the same again. But I think for egomaniacs, for delusional narcissists, this is just, a candy shop. I mean, it's just the best place to spend time. I mean, I've heard stuff I would love to repeat because it is so crazy as an example, but I can't. I would never out individuals, but man, wow. Yeah. People can have trouble processing it. And there's things that just sort of baffle me that, for example, where someone will say, well, some being came to me or my staff family, whatever, and this is how it is. This is how the universe is. This is how, these are the answers to every major existential question. Bang, 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 bullet points. This is how it works. End of story. That's how it is. I'm like, well, those 19 people over there all have different views. So out of you 20 people, everyone comes at it differently. So how do you process that? And then I guess some people will be defensive because it's difficult to have our reality challenged. We generally like our reality to be supported. You know, that's part of the sort of frailty, I think, of the human psyche. And you know, as emotional constructs, it's we want to be agreed with, want to be validated, and yeah, so I can kind of see it all at work in the community. But I have certainly seen that in whatever form, I genuinely think that most people want to do good with it. They see, especially if with genuine experiences, I think there are experiences of such a love that could only really exist otherwise between parent and child, something like that. There's a level to it that is just, it changes you. It's very, very difficult to not become more empathic, to not kind of expand your circle of compassion, to not want to spread the love and inspire people, because especially if it's inspiring you to do things, when you do things and you put them into the world, it inspires other people to do things and put them into the, you know, there's that saying, great saying, you must be the change you wish to see in the world. And for a lot of people, I think whether they have ever heard that or not, I think it becomes true for them. And what can they do but try? I mean, you're going to get stomped on. If you put it out on social media, you know, you're going to get what you get. And it's not always great. But I think over time, you develop more compassion, I think, for humans, because you realize this is a really tough gig, being a human, and we all get it wrong. And none of it's particularly easy. And we've got so many different ideas about what it is, what it means, the value of different things, how to prioritize, what masters, if any, to serve, how to teach, how to share, how to grow, how to find time for ourselves. And when we're all so bound up tightly in this crazy economy that only seems to reward more and more and more and more, you know, it's tough to find the time and the space for that kind of growth, for that kind of expansion. So I feel like we're all up against it in that sense.
Now, I know that you haven't had any negative encounters per se, right? With any negative entities.
Ooh, I sure have.
Oh, you have? Okay.
But only one. Yeah.
Interesting.
And it sucked. But so when I was a younger guy, my lifestyle was relationships with older women, and generally, how can I put it politely? You know, they're kind of crazy. You know, they were out there, and it was it was intense. And yeah, there's quite a few of these episodes. I would write a book on it, if I had no personal morals, but it just would be unethical. But I just think it's instructive. It was man. But this one in particular, we met on a blind date and had no idea the age gap was so big. I think I was like 21 and she was like 44. And we were both a bit shocked, but we thought, look, we're here now. We'd met up in this other town. We thought, let's just say hi. Let's, two human beings, we'll just have coffee and then, head on. And then within 5 minutes of the conversation, she told me that she was part of a spiritualist church and involved in, mediumship development and things of that sort. So I was hooked right there. I was like, okay, she's different. Now this is interesting. All right, we can work with this. And anyway, we started seeing each other. And one day I suggested we go to Alfriston, one of my favorite places on earth in the southeast of England. This little old village that looks straight out of a Charles Dickens story. And they used to have a Charles Dickens night there. They still have the gas lamps up. It's absolutely incredible. And they have a pub there, one of my favorite pubs in the world, which is called the Old Market, and also the Smugglers. It has two names. And if I'm remembering this correctly, because there's a bunch of pubs there. Anyway, so we go in the pub and it's summer. So we go out the back. And as we cross the threshold, going out into the conservatory, it's when you're swimming and you're in a warm ocean and you swim through a cold current. And it was like that. It was like I was walking through a cold current, and I knew what it was without ever having had the experience. I knew that's a spirit. There's something here. But I'd never had a negative experience, so I didn't worry about it. So I stopped, and she walked through. She caught me up, and I said, "Do you feel that?" And she asked me what, and I'm like, "Oh, must have just been me. Maybe it's a draft. Who knows?" Anyway, we sit down, we start chatting, and normally we got along like house on fire. Great, no arguments, no nonsense. Certainly not at that point. Everything was cool, except that suddenly we started to argue, and it got edgier and edgier and weirder because it was so unusual, right? And then I started to feel like arms like this around my body, squeezing my chest and pinning my arms to my sides. And the longer it went on, the moodier our conversation got, until it was turning into quite a nasty exchange. But there was part of me that knew exactly what was happening. And I was looking at her hand across the table, which was Calderano wine glass, just holding the stem, and my hand at this point was about a foot away. And I thought, if I can make contact with her, it will break this. I don't know where the hell that came from. Maybe it was my invisible presence. Who the hell knows? So even though I was quite kind of locked in place, I started having to, because I couldn't move my arm away from my body, I started just trying to lean my body forward and push my hand across the table to touch her fingers. And this seemed to go on for, I don't know how long. Under those circumstances, it felt like a long ass time. And eventually I touch her fingers and it all releases, and I fell forward as this thing, the hold was broken. And we were I was almost out of breath because it was constricting my chest. And we looked at each other as if we just snapped out of something, right? It's like, I'm sure you've seen things like that in movies. And suddenly it's like we were ourselves again. And we had no words. I just remember the shock on her face. And we both just fucking pounded these drinks. Glug, 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 glug.
Yeah.
Slam. And we sat there for a minute. And then I just said to her, "Shall we go?" And she sort of went. And I just will never, ever forget any of that. And then we got up and we hustled. I mean, like through the pub and out the back door. And then you've got to go down a long lane to where the car was parked. And it was like a movie. It's like, firstly, we're walking, then we're walking fast, then we're really walking fast, then it's a light jog, and then we were pounding it down this lane. In my memory, I would love to talk to her about this, see what she remembers. And then I remember I stopped suddenly because I was like, I was slightly ahead of her. I stopped, I turned around, and I was like, what the and she just jumped into my arms and started sobbing. So I know it didn't just happen to me.
Yeah.
And, I don't remember the conversation afterwards, but she knew enough about spirits. She'd had other negative experiences. We'll just leave it at that. So she knew what it was, but that was my first experience. So yeah, I've definitely been on that side of it. Here's the punchline. Years later, so that was like around 94 or 5, maybe. So in 2002, I was in Cork, City in Ireland, doing my degree, and my mother and sister were visiting. I don't know which year it was, if it was 02, 03, 04, doesn't matter. We go to a night of music in one of the pubs. It's just playing traditional Irish music, and it's a great old pub there. And sat drinking, chatting, listening to the music. It's all cool. And I noticed a copy of the Good Pub Guide. And I doubt you have one for America because it would be like, 18 feet tall. But Britain's one is about like this. And for some reason, I thought I'll look up the smugglers in Alfriston. So I flipped through, and here's the description. It says something like, paraphrasing, Smugglers Inn, also known as the Old Market, in Alfriston, is blah, 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 number of years old, hundreds of years old anyway. Something about the history of why it's called the Smugglers, because pirates used to come up the Cooknea River nearby and stash stuff, and it has all these crazy little secret rooms and walkways in the pub so they could hide their gear. And it says it has like a huge open fireplace, a restaurant, a conservatory, an aviary, and 2 resident ghosts. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that thing of just all the hair standing up on your back of your neck. Yeah, one of those.
Wow, that's very interesting, man. Now, do you think in the same way that people could be set on a path by a good contact experience, that they may, get in contact with the wrong type of entity, and maybe it's whispering things in their ear, sending them on the wrong path?
Well, I think humans, as discussed, are very prone to negative influences. Regardless of what your politics are, you're going to look at humans and agree that it's pretty easy for humans to buy into someone else's philosophy and do some pretty nasty stuff. And people might look at me and say, well, you're a bleeding heart liberal, lefty, eco warrior, tree hugging whack job. And they would think I'm nuts and I'm evil and I'm trying to put coal miners out of work and whatever and whatever. And I might have my opinions about the right and how easily people will buy into the craziest conspiracy theories. And that's really the age that we're in, of people just losing all rationality, the ability to think independently. Like, I can almost count on one hand the amount of people from outside my circle I've had contacts with over the last few years since Brexit and Trump got elected, and Bolsonaro and, you know, these other idiots, that have been able to have an even-handed conversation and say, well, okay, so here's what I think are the factors that contributed to these people getting elected, et cetera, most people, I think they want to be in one camp or another. Again, it's that sort of communal thing. I just think it's something that humans are predisposed to forming in groups and out groups. So if somebody gets any influence, it could be anything from listening to Public Enemy or Mussolini. It could be absolutely anything. And certainly if it's something of a human nature that can talk to us in regular language and we can go and kill for them. I mean, right now in this conversation, somebody has been killed by somebody else because of what someone else told them to do. I would be amazed if that were not the case somewhere. So it seems to me that if there are beings that can manipulate us in more hidden ways, it may come through dreams, it could come through all kinds of different influences. Sure, I have no reason to think that that could not be the case. I just have not heard of a case where, you know, it's made it into the media that so-and-so's defense, their legal defense, is that, you know, they were told to kill such and such by a Draco being from, you know, the Andromeda Galaxy.
Yeah.
I've never heard that, but it's not to say that it doesn't happen. I mean, you know, it's thrown around all the time. Oh, you're under psychic attack. Oh, you've got an entity attachment. I know people who help people with those things. To what extent any of that's legit, it's impossible to know if you're looking for something concrete. There's no one gets a certificate. It's not like that. It's you believe what you believe. And I don't think those people could be in business if there were not a steady flow of people knocking on the door saying, help me, I had this thing happen and now this thing won't leave me alone and I'm full of dark thoughts. And there's different ways to go with that. But, you know, I think through every era, back in the day, it might have been some god told me to do it, some entity or ghost or evil spirit. I mean, the idea of evil spirit seems to be as old as humankind. To what degree that might be explainable through what we call ET, who knows? I'm sure you could find someone somewhere that will pull a figure out of the air for you, but, you know, it's just all speculation.
Yeah, for sure. Now, we got a few minutes left. I want to get your take on the UFO phenomenon itself, what people are seeing in the skies. I think much of it is actually, you know, probably experimental craft. It's our own stuff that we're putting up there that people are mistaking as ET or off-planet craft. But for the things that are unexplainable, that truly aren't ours, do you think that is these beings trying to communicate, or do you think this UFO phenomena is something completely different?
Well, again, having been involved in this for a while, I have heard a great many theories. I've seen things myself that we're told don't exist. And certainly, I mean, if you look at the recent study that was published, I don't have the name, but you probably know what I mean. There was a report done not so long ago by the US government that said, you know, we looked at 144 cases or whatever it was, and only one of them was explainable, and the other we don't know. Now, you have to take with a pinch of salt anything the authorities say on this. I just don't think they're in the business of telling the truth. I just don't. I mean, that's a thing that we could talk about for another hour, but I don't see that they have any. I just don't think they believe that they owe the great mass of the public, the people who fund them, the truth. I genuinely don't. In fact, the longer I look at this, the more absurd it is that I think anyone ever goes to them. I mean, to me, it's just crackers to ask a liar for the truth. Why would you do that? Why on earth people think that disclosure is a thing that will ever happen with any kind of authenticity beyond, as you suggested at the beginning of our discussion, one person telling another, this is what happened, take it or leave it. That to me is the only real disclosure, the only authentic, genuine disclosure there'll ever be. I don't think it's such an enormous conversation, but that's the long and the short of it. I don't think the authorities tell the truth. I don't think they have in their minds, or potentially even in their own laws, anything that compels them to tell the truth. There may be nothing in there that says you can lie, but I don't think there's anything that says you have to tell people. I think that, you know, we have all of these documents that are declassified, and it's crazy if you put all of this together, because clearly there's a lot in the skies that people don't know what it is. And I don't think that much of it is experimental craft. Personally, I think that if we created those things, what we would not do is fly them very, very slowly in front of people with cell phones at night or in the day. That's not how you test highly classified craft. I mean, anyone who's read anything about the published history of Area 51 knows the lengths they went to create secrecy for their the testing of aircraft. I mean, this whole stealth thing was really born there, developed there. Well, I mean, a lot of it was built in California, but it was the testing, the proving ground, Area 51. So, of course, there's all the discussions about S4 and all of that. And all of that was supposedly about craft that had crashed. I mean, I interviewed Clifford Stone for We Are the Disclosure, the middle book, and he said he was on record a long time. Rest in peace, Clifford. I was told he'd passed away last year or the year before. And Clifford told me and many other people about his work on crash retrievals, right? So they are, and his job was as what they called an interfacer. So they understood that he was a guy that could connect with these beings without losing his mind.
Yeah.
And that was his job. And I would be astounded if he were lying. I just didn't come across to me as a liar, especially somebody who was spending his time combing through thousands of declassified documents daily. Right. And that's just one little data point. There are many, 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 many others that point to these craft not being produced by humans and not being too fussed, it seems, about being filmed, about being recorded. And there's a whole rabbit hole to go down concerning the links between ETs and different factions in the government, in the military, and beyond. I mean, this is one of those endless discussions. I mean, we could do a 22 episode series on almost any of these things and not run out of things to talk about, because it is just that big. It's been happening that long, that broadly, to that many people, that the answers to all of these things, I mean, eventually, either you give up trying to come to a conclusion, or you realize, I'm never going to know. I could buy such and such. That makes sense to me. This is possible. That doesn't resonate. Whatever. There's lots of options for all of these topics. And again, it's one of those things that I trust that when I'm out of this body, I will get a really clear view of. I mean, it may be that as soon as you drop your body, you just don't look over your shoulder. You just don't care. You're on to the next thing. But given my construction as a being, as an endlessly inquisitive one that has experienced, a pretty crazy range of things down here, I would love to be able to put it all together and answer all of these questions in a really clear way.
Oh yeah, for sure. And you're absolutely right. It's like a huge intergalactic onion that we got to peel, and it never ends. Right. And there's so much stuff that we could cover. So I'd love to have you back on to get deeper into some of these topics for sure one day.
Sure.
Yeah, that would be great. Well, Miguel, thank you so much for coming on. Now, if people want to find out more about you, pick up some of your books, you have social media, websites, all that good stuff, let them know about.
Yep. I guess you'll put links.
Yes, I'll have links
in the description or wherever. But my website is miguelmendonça.com, and I've got a bunch actually. There's wearethedisclosure.com, and there's the meetthehybrids.wordpress.com, and sakamiru.com, which is for my music, as I don't write anymore, but I'm full-time making music. My first album is out now on Bandcamp and every streaming platform. It's called On Out Into, and it's just, some crazy electronic voyages. It's really the kind of soundtrack, I think, to my books. Like if you had it on in the background when you're reading, it would fit. And I think that's no accident.
That's great. Yes, I'll have definitely all those links in the description. Miguel, thank you so much. That was a fantastic conversation, and we'll definitely do it again sometime soon.
Cool. It was my pleasure.
Definitely. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll be talking again after the new year. Happy New Year, everyone.